just your internal functionings and the way you kind of perceive the world. So that can also kind of contribute to like depression. Also social. So this can play a big role. I mean, you know, if you're going through a very hard time, you've lost your job, you've lost a husband, you know, you lost a child, that can be a trigger for depression, okay? It can be something that can perpetuate a depressive episode. It can be something that, you know, brings on a manic episode. It can be a lot of different things that can kind of contribute to a mood disorder. So just to look down at the symptoms list, this is not an exhaustive list. And it's not just about just taking one symptom and saying like, oh, you must have depression. It can be, oftentimes it's a combination of symptoms that happens when someone's depressed, okay? Does anyone ever think that like, well, maybe I had a friend or maybe I had an aunt or a cousin with depression? Anyone have anyone like that? Yeah, okay. What do you guys remember about, you know, that was different in their behaviors or maybe their mood? Definitely those changes can happen, especially with like substance use. Oftentimes people are like, you know, they were doing fine and then they started using, you know, alcohol or marijuana or whatnot. Sometimes people are using those things to like basically self-medicate, you know, because they're not quite sure how to deal with their moods. So there are, you know, several different types of, you know, mood disorders, including like, this is probably more so important for like the mental health provider, but oftentimes, you know, patients will ask me like what kind of, you know, depression or what kind of mood disorder. And this is just a list of some of the different mood disorders: major depression, dysthymia, bipolar 1, bipolar 2, cyclothymia. And all of these different types are dependent upon like the duration in time, you know, what episode actually occurred. You can have a variety of different symptoms. You know, someone can have, let's say, like multiple, you know, years of like, I'm always going through this. It's like it's a depression, or I'm up, or I'm depressed, or I'm up. I don't know what's going on with me. And sometimes people can go decades living like that and never actually get help, but suffer the entire time. And they're just trying to figure out, why can't I seem to like stay in a relationship? How come I can't keep a job? How come every time I try to go to school, I've flunked out? I don't know what's happening. I've tried so hard my entire life and nothing goes right. So oftentimes, you know, it can be undiagnosed. Oftentimes, then we try to figure out, like, what are we going to do at this point, you know? What are we going to do with individuals who are suffering and they're going through this? Oftentimes we have to think about like interventions. Like I said, like if you're a friend or a family member, you know, being there for them is very helpful. To have a support network is very helpful. But also being able to know, like, okay, I think you need to see someone, you know. Maybe you see your primary care doctor, because that's the first person that they typically run into so far as the healthcare system, okay, for them to be at least assessed, and then maybe they need to be referred to maybe a therapist or a psychiatrist. It kind of depends on where they are in their life at that point, as well as their severity of symptoms. Some people, they want to just do therapy, and that's appropriate sometimes, and some people it's like, the symptoms are so severe that sometimes we have to think about medication, okay? Oftentimes people get kind of scared of medication There's always possible side effects with medications. I know being a psychiatrist, I have to be open and honest about side effects, benefits, risk of medications, especially with individuals who are going through significant depression, significant bipolar, okay? Sometimes what I'll try to do is I'll try to connect with a therapist and try to do like a tag team, where me and the therapist are working closely together, where it's like, okay, let's see how we can go about helping this individual, reach the quality of life that they would like to reach, okay? And so some of the medications are just like classes of different medicines. There are antidepressants, mood stabilizers, there are neuroleptics, antipsychotics. Therapy can include the individual. It may sometimes include family, depending upon what the situation is, or even group therapy, depending upon what the situation is. And sometimes, the individual may not just have a mood disorder, but also, like we were talking about, substance abuse issues as well, okay? It tends to become more complicated when you have multiple things going on. So let's say, for instance, like someone comes in, they'll see me, and, they're homeless. They may have, also just lost a spouse, and, they have a history of abuse, and they do, maybe they have substance abuse problems. I'll just be honest with them, like, this is a lot. It's going to be complicated, but we'll try to get through it together, okay? And that's why it's most important when they have, like, a support system, because I tell them, like, you'll see me once a month, you'll see your therapist once a week, but you're going to need family and friends to be there, in between, okay? So the next thing I wanted to talk about was anxiety. Now, how many people deal with anxiety? Just about everybody? Now, you don't have to be shy. You can raise your hand if you deal with anxiety. With anxiety, it's a very uneasy feeling that people can have. I mean, people can have all sorts of things. Like, I'll tell you, for instance, like, I don't like planes. I'll get on the plane. I'll ride the plane, but I would rather take a car, a bus, a train, anything else. Because the simple fact that, for some people with anxiety, it's not just a mental thing, but it's a physical thing. You can have palpitations. You can have sweaty. You can, have heart racing, and you're like, what's going on with my body? I don't know what's happening. Because unless you're running from a bear or you're in a fight, you're like, why should my heart be racing? Why should I be sweaty? Why should I feel like so nervous? To have those kind of symptoms or feelings when you're not in danger can be very alarming to individuals and very scary. So just looking at the traditional definition of anxiety, it's basically fear or nervousness about what might happen, okay? Like on the plane, what might happen to this plane? Oftentimes, individuals may be friends or family members, and they may say, like, I'm really worried, that this is going to happen. And other people say, like, oh, it's okay. I mean, what's the point of worrying about it? They're like, I can't cut it off. Sometimes they literally cannot cut it off. It's like a spinning record constantly, and it keeps going. It keeps them up at night. They're trying to work. They're trying to study. They're trying to deal with their children or whatever it may be, and they're like, I can't cut it off. It's very distracting for me. I wish I could cut it off. They can be very tearful. They can become depressed because of their anxiety. So, oftentimes it can be just as bad as, depression, or it can lead to depression, okay? Similar to, like, depression, similar etiology possibilities. It can be biological, Someone can come in and say, like, well, everybody in my family has anxiety. Everybody, everyone's nervous about something, And also, like, some people are like, even some small children, it seems like they're already kind of predisposed and they're already talking about, well, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do that. And they're like very fearful. And sometimes, you'll see, parents, and you're like, they don't seem to be too anxious, But sometimes the kids, already have a temperament of being like very scary. They don't like certain things. They don't like bugs or whatnot, and they freak out, Sometimes, you're kind of born certain ways, and that can contribute to, anxiety. But typically, anxiety is not pathological until it's causing impairment or distress, okay? If it's causing you not to be able to do what you need to do, okay? Or extreme distress, that's when it's a problem, okay? Anybody ever have like an anxiety attack or something they think might be an anxiety attack? Yeah? One? Anybody else? Yeah? Okay. Care to explain what that looks like? Anybody? Wanting to escape? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. Wanting to escape, having palpitations, being hypervigilant, sweating, feeling nauseous. It can all happen all of a sudden, very quickly. You could see someone, they could be in a supermarket, they could be in church. It looks like, are they having a heart attack right now? What's going on? Sometimes people think that they are having a heart attack, and they go to the emergency room to get checked out because that's how serious it feels when you're having an anxiety attack. Sometimes, people may have once in a year. Sometimes people are having multiple all day long or multiple in a week's time. And they're like, I can't live like this. This is too much. So anxiety can be a bit of a beast to kind of master, okay? But, there are different types of anxiety. I know Dr. Goldberg will talk a little bit about trauma later. There's also like social anxiety, separation anxiety, generalized anxiety, panic disorders, all types of different anxieties. And sometimes it can be a medical issue too. For some individuals, they can have something called hyperthyroidism, and that can manifest with anxiety symptoms. So oftentimes, like, you need to go to figure out, especially if you're having a lot of physical symptoms, you need to go to the doctor to find out and make sure there's nothing medical going on, okay? So typically they want to rule that out to make sure. And sometimes people get kind of upset a little bit when they're like, all right, so you're telling me this is all in my head? They're like, what are you talking about? Like, this is real. This feels real. Even though they may think like, oh, it's all in my head, biologically there is something going on with you, okay? Oftentimes we think about mental health as if it's separate from our bodies, but it's not. Our brain is attached to our bodies, okay? Things that can stress us out in our brain can affect how we feel physically, okay? So we tend to detach it as if these are two different things, but they're not. So similar to like interventions, typically there's therapy. Oftentimes I encourage therapy as like a first line, especially for anxiety, because it can be a chronic thing that you can deal with for a very long time, and really you have to learn how to face it, okay? It's probably the biggest thing with like facing your fears, and it talks about that in the Bible. You'd be very scared to face your fears. Oftentimes we want to run away from those things that we are afraid of, but oftentimes you have to be like, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to face this thing with the help of family, with the help of friends, with the help of my therapist. So oftentimes, therapy is like, you got to get into therapy. I've had a couple of individuals who are like, I just don't want to feel this way anymore. Can we just make that happen? Just give me the pill. And I'm like, you can have a pill, but, and sometimes, having medication is appropriate, but so far as the anxiety, you have to learn how to face it. But I know in the beginning it can be really hard for people. It can be extremely hard, okay? So that's anxiety kind of in a nutshell a little bit, okay? The very last thing I kind of want to talk about a little bit is about suicide, okay? So unfortunately, there are times in which things get very rough for people, Some people have gone their entire lives thinking about how they don't want to live anymore. And I mean from the time in which they were small. I've had individuals from, 5, 6, 7 saying that I don't want to live anymore. I'm like, you hardly know what death is. What are you saying? So for other individuals who are a bit older, I've seen those individuals as well. They may have gone through something like Vietnam, and after that, they've had a lot of guilt. They've blamed themselves for, something traumatic happening, whether it was abuse. They've been victims of abuse. And they're like, what's the point? Why should I be here? I'm suffering every single day. It can be extremely hard to know oftentimes what to say to those individuals. You can say, because oftentimes you're thinking well, I don't deal with this on a day-to-day basis. No one's telling me that they want to take their lives. But oftentimes it's a very sensitive subject. So if someone ever does come to you, or someone who's contemplating something like that, the best thing to do is to be very, non-judgmental and tell them what's going on? How can I help you? How can I, be of any help to you? Not, if someone's telling you, particularly if it's more of an acute issue, where it's like you've walked in on someone who is attempting suicide, you cannot leave them alone. You have to get help right away. You can't leave them alone. Sometimes they may beg you not to get them help. Don't call the police. They're going to take me away. They're going to take me to the hospital. You have to intervene, okay? It's very tough for families to do that. It's tough for friends to do that. Sometimes you can lose friends, okay? Sometimes family members can get angry with you for calling and intervening, okay? But at the end of the day, that could set them up to help, get the interventions that they need, okay? There are a couple of things that kind of put people at higher risk for suicide. If they actually been diagnosed with depression, anxiety, or even if it's not diagnosed but it's gone untreated, or any other mental illness. There's schizophrenia, there's bipolar, things like that people can, like I said, go undiagnosed with, and that could put them at higher risk of suicide. There's also substance abuse disorders, obviously can put you at risk of suicide, partly because, when you're kind of impaired, you're not thinking straight. If you're not thinking straight, you're thinking well, what's the point? Might as well. Also, people with chronic pain, going their entire lives with ongoing physical pain. And they've gone through the gamut of meds, surgery, acupuncture, everything that they could have imagined. They're like, I've done everything. And I'm in horrible pain. You don't understand. You don't have anything to give me. There's nothing you could say to me right now. I'm in pain. I don't want to be like this anymore. So chronic pain can be a big risk factor too. Individuals who had multiple suicide attempts are even a greater risk. Family history of suicide. Sometimes people don't always know what happened, to family members, but they kind of think I think, my uncle, I think maybe my father, but I'm not really sure because we don't talk about it. Unfortunately, we don't talk about these things. We don't talk about these things at the dinner table. We don't talk about these things, outside of, the doctor's office, which is unfortunate because we need to talk about it. Unless we start talking about it, that's the only way it's going to get any better, okay? Because Mm-hmm.
Sometimes when you're trying to support those who are going through the depression, part of their depression is that they yell from talk.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
you sound like a catch-22.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do there?
So when I mean like talking about it, like even before it ever happens, like, maybe everybody seems fine in the family, No one seems to have depression, Talking about it from the time in which kids are younger, Making it, not a taboo, Being open, like, yeah, okay, sometimes we cry, sometimes these things happen, But if you ever feel like you're so depressed, if you ever feel like you're so anxious that you can't handle it, you can't manage it, please come to me, Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. 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 Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 Yes, that's exactly, she's exactly right. Oftentimes, because kids feel nervous about talking to parents or whatnot about it, they're like, we don't talk about this, so I'm going to talk to my friends about it. Their friends are suffering with the same kind of issues, but, they're kids, they don't really know. So they're going to need the wisdom of someone older, okay? But like I said, we have to make it where it's open, where it's like, okay, just let me listen. Let me just listen. I don't necessarily have all the advice, but let me just listen to you. Without, judgment or anything, just tell me. I know that it can be really difficult if you have a child who's cutting. First thing is like, oh my God, why are you cutting? Why are you doing this? What's going on? Oftentimes it freaks parents out, because they're like, put the blade down, I don't know what's going on, but you better stop doing this. The thing is, like, you have to also be calm yourself as well, okay, in order to be able to talk about it, okay? First things first, it's like, okay, well, kind of just tell me what's going on and just sit there. Sit there in silence and let them talk. Offer them other ways of talking. If you feel like you can't talk to me verbally, do you want to write it down? Have you had a journal where you've been, putting down your feelings? If you want to share it with me, I'll be willing to, read about it. And then, asking the child or the adolescent later, like, all right, it looks like, you're having a really difficult time. And there's a lot of people having a very difficult time. So what do you want us to do about it? I have some ideas, but what would you like to do? Okay? Just kind of being a bit more open, a bit less judgmental, less anxious, because sometimes kids are like, I'm not telling my mom's anxious. They're like, I'm not telling her. She's going to freak out. That'll probably be me, but...
I have a question. Especially kids. Can you explain like anxiety symptoms? So fearful of everything and actually don't want to do things because they're fearful of maybe a bug.
Uh-huh.
How do you how do you react to those things? Do you just take note of it and you watch it, or Is there a time that you think that we should be a little bit more concerned? Is there an age? Is there an age limit? That kind of stuff.
Like, with kids, they're going to have a lot of fears. Some kids are afraid of the dark. Actually, a lot of kids are afraid of the dark. They're like, put the light, put the night light on. Put the night light on. Some of those fears, are, appropriate, and kids grow out of it, okay? It's a problem when, the kids are like, I'm not going to go to school. This is week 2 of you trying to miss school, or week 2 of you complaining every morning. I'm like, I feel so nauseous. I'm having a headache. Please don't make me go. And they're crying. I mean, they're like in complete distress. And you're like, okay, I feel like I have to drag you out to go to school. That's a problem, because that child is obviously in a lot of distress. When it's very evident, that like, okay, this can't be normal, This couldn't possibly be. Because I'm struggling to get my child out for the last month to go to school, Things like that. Or like, let's say, some of the kids are playing with other kids, and I'm going to use the example of like maybe OCD. Like some kids can get kind of very rigid, okay, to the point that they're not even able to kind of play with other kids because they're like, no, everything has to be this way. It has to be, no, all the cars will be lined up this way. Everything, and it's like a pervasive thing. You see it in multiple situations. It's a breakdown. It could be crying when you're like, okay, well, maybe let's try to play the game a little bit different. They're like, no, they're screaming, they're tantrums. You're like, wait a minute. I'm just trying to get you to be a little bit more flexible. When you start to do, your regular parenting where you're like, okay, I'm trying to do and maneuver with the child, but none of this is helping, you need to start thinking about seeking professional help, okay? So you can kind of get, assessed to see, is this normal, okay? Because it's not one of those quick, fast things oftentimes. Obviously, if someone's cutting, I think you need to go get them checked out, okay? Because you don't know how deep it goes, okay? Or someone attempted suicide, you need to get them evaluated because that's pretty significant, okay? But so, anxiety, in small children, like they're scared of the dark, that's appropriate. They could be scared of monsters, Some of that's appropriate. That'll happen, to the best of us. I know I used to be scared of the dark when I was a kid. I grew out of it, But that could, if it's going on and it's like you're about 40 now and you're still scared of the dark, no. Right, just like, like the lights got to be on. Lord. So, just to talk a little bit about, to continue to talk about the risk factors of suicide. So, not to impinge on people's, it's very controversial, firearms in a home. Easy access to these things, it just predisposes you to it, okay? What I try to do is I'm not going to be judgmental with family members who keep firearms in their home. But what I try to tell them and to inform them is, if you have children, you need to have this locked away. They're like, but what if there's a burglar? I got to get to my firearm. I'm like, you need to be thinking about the kids, okay? You need to have it locked away. No easy access for the children, okay? And I know that can be a touchy subject for, some family members, but oftentimes I have to have that touchy conversation, okay? Having recently been released from jail or prison poses you at increased risk of suicide. Oftentimes it's a big transition to go, from being in jail, being in prison, and now you're back in, into society. And oftentimes if you have a record, society is not very welcoming, okay? It's hard to get a job. It's hard to find support. It's hard to find forgiveness in yourself, from others. So it can be a very difficult transition, okay?
You find also that on the opposite spectrum that those who, like, maybe graduated from school and they go into a depression because now the expectation is that you do, go to that next level and you're not going to that next level. You can't find a job and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
You start to get questioned and you can go into the same kind of scenario as those who are on the other side of the spectrum.
Mm-hmm. So I do work with college students, so I see that quite often. When it's time to graduate and transition, and they're like, okay, I'm freaked out. This is like, I was okay and I was doing fine. Now I'm freaked out. I'm scared. I don't know if I'm going to find a job. My family is telling me you better find a job because you don't have a place when you come home. I'm like, goodness, So that transition can be very difficult because if you've been a student for their entire time, living on campus or whatnot, now you have to go into the real world and have to figure all of this out. And every milestone that oftentimes people go through can be a trigger, okay? It can be a trigger, especially when things don't work out how you thought that they were going to work out. That can be very difficult to kind of deal with. And if you don't have any coping skills, that can make it even more insurmountable sometimes, okay? Now, unfortunately, we don't have control over these things, okay? Oftentimes people, it's difficult for them to just be able to say, I don't have control, and that's okay. I'm going to do my best. It's very difficult, okay? Because sometimes the mindset is I should have control. I should be able to do these things. I should be able to find a job. Why can't I find a job? So that also can be a very difficult challenge. It can be a challenge even for grade school children, middle school to high school. That's a transition. Elementary to middle school, okay? All of those are transition points, okay? So checking in with people at those transition points, how are you doing? How are you getting along, being open and honest about your own, troubles, during those transition points, I think can be helpful, okay? To say hey, I'm going through this too, or I went through that as well. These are some things that helped me, I'm not sure if they'll help you, but I think it's quite, normal for people to have more difficult points, okay? But of course, if they're having more difficult points and it's everything else is starting to go downhill, just say it's okay to talk to someone professional if things are going down and are going down pretty quickly, okay? Let's see. And then just the last part, which is what you had touched on earlier, was the exposure to other peers who are doing, kind of suicidal gestures, behaviors, self-injurious behaviors. That puts you at risk for suicide too. Oftentimes, it could be a superficial cutting, and you think, okay, well, it didn't really break the skin, but sometimes things escalate, because sometimes people are all right, well, let me try harder next time. Say that again. Oh, sorry.
Hi. When do you advise someone to see a psychiatrist versus a psychologist?
Well, oftentimes I'll tell them, if they're coming to me, I'm a psychiatrist, okay? So sometimes they'll come to me like parents with their children, and they may come in with maybe anxiety, depression. If I find that it's, in my opinion, mild, if it's mild anxiety where it's all right, they're still functioning relatively well, but it's causing a lot of distress. There's no suicidal thoughts, no, self-injurious behavior. Family has never tried therapy before. I would say, I think it's appropriate for you guys to go ahead and try therapy first, okay? Sometimes, though, it can be really significantly bad where they're they've attempted suicide, they've been in a psychiatric hospital. We are just now getting to see a psychiatrist after 6 months of dealing with this on our own. we haven't, and we can't see a psychologist because our insurance won't cover therapy. So oftentimes it kind of depends. It's like multiple factors that are involved. So it kind of depends. Okay.
And just to let you know, we put a mic in the center. I know a lot of people probably won't want to get up. We want everybody to hear your questions. So please, if you do have a question, there's a mic right in the center. Please use it. Thank you.
Oh, that's mine. Can't cut that off. Because of social media now, oftentimes people are posting. Sometimes they're posting for help. It's better, even if you don't really know that person, it's okay to reach out to them. I've seen a couple of posts by people, I'm thinking like, that's a little worrisome, I'll reach out with something comforting, good word, and a few resources and phone numbers for them, okay? Because oftentimes people are like reaching out because they're at their last. And if they don't have anyone to say, realize that, okay, I posted something on Instagram or Facebook, no one even cares, no one even said anything. I guess I'm done. So, if you see something, you need to say something, okay?
Do you think the prevalence of social media has impacted? Yes, do you think just with social media being so prevalent, especially young people's life, do you think that has contributed to mental health disorders or?
Well, I think it's kind of hard to say because I think with social media being as it is, like now we get so much connection with each other 24/7. We're able to kind of talk to each other about anything, anywhere, anybody. I think it probably looks more prevalent because people have, the media to be able to utilize it to talk about these things. And I think that's probably why we're seeing it a little bit more than before. At some point, when we didn't have telephones and, cars, it's if you lived across the state of, in California and you're in Michigan and we're doing horse and buggy, well, I don't know if you're depressed all the way in California, You have to think about the times. The times do change and they do impact us. But I do think social media is probably, we're seeing more prevalence because people are able to kind of talk about it more, okay? It's kind of like, oh, you're talking about it, so maybe I could talk about it. But the issue is that oftentimes there are young people that are talking about it and they have no guidance. And they're talking amongst each other. And they're like, so what do you think? What are you going to do? Especially there are different things besides the self-interest behavior like cutting, there's eating disorders. So they have full, blogs dedicated to how to become skinny, and that's their support group. So, in some ways it's great for us to be able to communicate, but oftentimes then that kind of leads you to be able to communicate with other people who are kind of in some ways, in the layman's terms, lost as well, okay? So it can be a good thing and it can be a bad thing, okay? Kind of answer?
I work in healthcare, and I've seen a lot of young people, 18, 20, 45, testing 1, 2, 3. Yes. Yeah, I've seen a lot of young people that come that attempted suicide that seem to have it together. I'm talking about folks that are from good background, good support system, because they're in a relationship and the relationship didn't work out, and they, the last one I had in the unit was someone who tied cinder block to all 4 limbs. This is a young guy, 22 years old, you know, going to university and all of that. And he tied cinder block, put himself in a sleeping bag, and jumped in his pool, right? And it so happened that somebody heard a splash at 3 o'clock in the morning, and, you know, he was saved. So I'm just trying to figure out, was there a problem long before this, or could this one break, you know, could have led to this, you know?
So oftentimes, you know, we always kind of see the aftermath or the results of things that have been going on for quite some time. I too have individuals where it's there was a breakup that happened and you're there was extreme suicide attempt afterwards, and you're well, wait a minute, what happened? It looked like everything was together. I've seen these individuals where it seems like everything is well put together, but inside they're in turmoil. They've been in turmoil for years. They say, I pretend to be happy because that's what everybody expects from me. I pretend like everything is fine because I don't have anything to actually complain about from an external standpoint. But inside, I'm exhausted. Inside, I'm devastated. Inside, I feel like I'm not good enough. Inside, I feel guilty about things that normally other people wouldn't feel guilty about. Inside, I've been feeling like this for years and I haven't shared it. I've just kind of faked it. So, I mean, those things can happen to anybody. You know, you see a lot of the celebrities where you're oh, they have money, they have fame, they should be happy. Why would they ever take their lives? But inside, you can be in a lot of turmoil and have no peace, and nobody ever even knows because nobody talks about it when they think well, you should be happy. Why aren't you happy? You have a house, a car, you're married, you got kids. What are you sad about? When it's depression, all those things could be well intact, and inside you feel awful. You feel awful.
So I have a question, because some of the things that you're describing, you know, we see these situations in the church. So I'm trying to think about how can we better support, you know, our church members, because, you know, we all come here and we look like everything is just so fine. But then you see different types of behaviors, like sometimes people become more isolated. Sometimes you see them changing their behavior because they could be going through all kinds of things. Like, say for instance, there was a person who was going through a situation, and at one time they weren't wearing any makeup, then all of a sudden they were wearing a whole lot of makeup, you know, and I'm not talking about makeup, I'm just talking about the behavior changes that seem like something is going on underneath that. And found that, you know, there were things that were going on underneath that. It could have been a breakup, it could have been an identity crisis that they were going through. So, but to better support those who are around us, you know, we can't ignore the signs. So how can we do that? And I know we don't want to be invasive, you know, of their privacy and everything. And like you say, if you see something, say something. So you might try to you know, talk to them or try to find out things. But I'm really concerned because I know and have experienced, you know, people in our churches that have gone through serious mental you know, problems, and you wonder okay, how can I get this person some help? Because I don't want them to go out, and just because we don't see them doesn't mean, you know, they just staying away from church. No, they're going through some serious problems and we need to do something, but I'm not equipped with all of that, but I want to help.
Yeah. So, I mean, oftentimes, you know, I'd say as a family member or a church member, things like that, you know, you can kind of be a little bit you know, been seeing you lately, just calling to check on you, you know. Let's exchange numbers, you know. I just want to see how you're doing. Maybe I'll call you, you call me, you know, maybe do a little buddy system, okay, to just be able to check in on people, okay. I mean, I don't know. I know for some places, like they had like it was one church, they had like individual like small groups and things like that, where they would kind of meet and they would talk about like, well, how do you deal with these practical matters, you know? And people would come out and they have like group, you know, sessions and. But I'm gonna just answer this last one because Dr. Goldberg has to do her presentation because it's 6. So I'm gonna have her to do hers, and then we can have more Q&A at the end. Okay? But having like group, I think small groups can be helpful. Having things like I said, like buddy systems, you know, checking in on people, you know, every few weeks or so. Say like, I'm just calling, check in, you know. Maybe we can have coffee, you know. Something that's maybe outside of church where you're like, hey, just checking in on you. Because when you build that rapport with people, they're more likely to be a little bit more open with you. Okay?
And I know she has to come up, but I have a question. So when you do know somebody that could possibly be struggling with suicide, what are some things not to say to that person or not to do? I know it's kind of, you know, you want to approach that person and comfort them, but I also don't want to say the wrong thing that ticks it off. But you know, what do you not do?
Well, you know, one thing is, you know, definitely not judging. Like, well, why would you ever do that? You know, it doesn't help to make them feel like, well, you shouldn't be thinking about that. What's wrong with you? Definitely, you know, try to be non-judgmental, you know, giving them numbers to contact, okay? That one flyer I gave you with it has some phone numbers on the back. It has a text, actual suicide text line that you could text, the National Suicide Hotline, when you could actually talk to somebody when you're having thoughts of suicide in the middle of the night, 24/7, giving them resources, okay? But definitely staying out of the way of being judgmental, okay? It's like, sounds like you're going through something. Like, I'm concerned, you know, but I just want you to know that I'm here anytime you need to talk to me, okay? But here are some other numbers just in case I'm not able to talk to you, okay? And maybe it's time for you to see someone, okay? Just being encouraging, non-judgmental, but still supportive. Okay.
And I think something that's important, letting them know they're not the only ones feeling that way. Other people have, it's not that they're abnormal, but it doesn't always stay that way. People don't necessarily always feel that way. And there's hope. It can pass.
Definitely. All right. So I'm going to have Dr. Goldberg do her portion of the presentation, and then towards the end we'll have more Q&A, okay? Okay.
Hi everyone, can you hear me? Okay, is it too loud? Okay, I'll let you know ahead of time that I am hard of hearing, so I cannot hear you. If anyone can sign, that would be great. All right, we'll learn sign later. Okay. Okay. I want to tell you, I'm Dr. Karen Goldberg. I'm a board-certified child, adolescent, and adult psychiatrist. I am so proud of Dr. Florvella. She was my child and adolescent psychiatry fellow for her final 2 years of training, and I was her attending, which is like a supervisor. And now I see her, and I feel like a grand attending. Mazel tov. Okay. The other thing I wanted to share with you is that today is Shabbat. It is, I just wanted to say Shabbat Shalom. Shalom, shalom, okay. And I think most of you know that the Jewish Sabbath starts at sundown on Friday night, ends at sundown on Saturday night. With the Havdalah service, so we'll be doing that no, I was kidding. Okay. Okay. So, you know, I was trying to think about what did I want to share with all of you. And there were a lot of things that were going through my mind. So, I thought since we're here, maybe talking about trauma and spirituality and how healing and faith is very important to all of us. Okay, and I'm very open for questions. So if you want to ask any questions, just keep it to yourself. I don't want to hear it. I mean, raise your hand, get one of those little thingamajiggers, and then we'll share, okay? All right, so I think we can go to the next slide. I'm going to follow along with my little thing. Okay, so basically, I'm just going to give you a rundown. There is no quiz. This is just for your information. I'm going to try not to be boring, talk about challenges, but I do kind of nerd out a little bit, so just kind of bring me back, snap a couple times when I'm getting in that nerd glaze. Okay, so trauma comes from the Greek word for wound, okay, for wound, and we all know that it's a deeply disturbing experience. We have all in our lives experienced trauma, one degree or another, okay? It can also be emotional shock. It can follow severe stress, okay? And Dr. Florvella, do you know her as Dr. Florvella? Or Dr. Florvella the Greatest? Can you tell me which one it is? The Greatest, okay. Okay, so Shauna shared in her presentation, and you can call me Karen, the Greatest, and she shared about trauma and some of the after effects of that. And we have all experienced trauma. In our childhood, you can't really go through life without a little bit of trauma, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So in essence, it's sudden, unexpected, overwhelming, intense blows or a series of blows which assault the person, okay? From the outside, typically. Oftentimes there are feelings of hopelessness, helplessness, loss, anger. Loss is almost always a component of trauma. Always, okay? Oops. I messed up mine. But yours is good. Okay. All right. So the types of trauma. There's the type 1, which is a one-time event. Something horrific happens. A tsunami, a tornado. I think we're having a little difficulty getting to the next slide. Okay. It can be a traumatic experience of a crime. You're a victim of, there we go. So you're either a direct victim or you're a witness of the violence directly. And that's kind of that's the type 1. A big thing happens and it's traumatic, okay? Type 2 is the chronic exposure, ongoing traumatic exposure, repeated assaults, repeated abuse, okay, that goes on for a very long time, okay? All right. Okay, so the fear response, next slide, oh, you got it, okay. So we're on different iPads, so we're trying to coordinate. Okay, so the fear response is that fear reaction starts in the brain, okay? Starts in the brain, and then it spreads throughout the body, and it happens like that. So when Shauna was talking about, gosh, you get that, all of a sudden my heart's racing, I'm sweating, I can't catch my breath, I have pins and needles in my fingers, and I just want to flee. That's after a long cascade of events that happen in nanoseconds in your body, okay? Starting in the brain. So the fear response starts in the region of the brain called the amygdala. I'll show you a picture of it. It's really very cute in its profile picture. It's an almond-shaped set of nuclei in the temporal lobe. You guys remember what that is, temporal? Okay, cool. You guys are cool. All right. And it really helps us with the emotional effect of this stimuli. Helps us to modulate it and understand it, how much something stands out to us. Okay? The emotional response to a trauma is more pronounced with anger and with fear. Okay? And the neurochemicals, we know there are chemicals in the brain, and that's what really modulates it. So, like, for instance, when we see the movie Halloween, back before a lot of you were born, there was a movie called Halloween, and I saw it in 9th grade, and it was terrifying. Terrifying. I can't even hear that music. Dee, dee, dee. Oh boy. Okay? But I didn't have dreams, nightmares, intense worries that Michael Myers was around the corner. Okay? So how did my brain tell me that fear event was different than what I just witnessed on the news? Okay? I don't want to say an inappropriate joke, political joke, But I think what the difference was is that Trump wasn't speaking. Okay, I'm done. I'm done. Okay, I'm gonna, it's appropriate? Okay, can I get an amen? Oh yeah, that was my first amen. Okay, that was my first amen. Okay, all right, next slide. Oh, you already got the next slide. Okay, so basically this is the brain on fear. And the part in the blue is part of the limbic system, where the amygdala lives, okay? Your limbic system is your emotional response center. And there's several parts of the brain that interact and speak to each other to help you modulate what this experience is. Is this a real fear, or is it Michael Myers on the screen and I'm gonna go home and be safe, okay? So that's how it happens. All right, so what we do know is that if you are the victim or you witnessed a horrific event happen, there are lots of consequences. Sorry, I moved away. Can you still hear me? Okay. There are consequences. You can have acute stress reaction to it. You can have post-traumatic stress disorder. You can have major depression, generalized anxiety, panic disorder. There's a number of things that can follow it. Someone shared about a family member who came back from Vietnam years ago. Repeated exposures to trauma, day in and day out. Of course, that person had difficulty. Okay, so I got a few slides on the DSM criteria, and I'm not going to bore you with reading it word by word. I just want you guys to get the highlights of it, okay? So the DSM, is everybody familiar with what the DSM is? Okay. So some people are, some people aren't. So it's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual that started back in the 70s as an attempt to come up with clinical features that meet the criteria for disorders so that we can have a common language among professionals on how we understand what is bipolar, what is major depression, what is generalized anxiety, and what is post-traumatic stress. So the criteria in the most recent DSM for PTSD has several criteria. Exposure to actual or threatened death, serious injury, or violence of a sexual nature, either by experiencing it directly, witnessing it in someone else, where there is this sense that there is imminent death or harm, and one cannot escape, okay? You can also get you can get PTSD if you're a first responder who's witnessing repeated traumas in such a manner. It does not, in the DSM, reflect violence that we see on TV or violence that we read about in the newspapers, and I challenge that. I, for one, feel very traumatized by what we're seeing almost on a daily basis now, okay? So, but I'm just letting you know that how it is written, it does not include that. And I'm just going to note that I was not on the committee. But I will be next time. Okay. Okay. So you have to have some associated symptoms with it, right? So you can't just say, well, I saw this and I'm traumatized. It's the same thing. I saw Michael Myers. I was scared, beyond scared with that movie. But I didn't have the associated symptoms. So I don't have PTSD from all Jamie Lee Curtis movies. Okay? See, that aged me. That just shows you my age. People are like, she was in that movie? Yes. She was a teenager, so was I. Okay, anyway. She was a much older teenager than I was. I was a budding 9th grader. God, she must have been, what, a senior? Okay. Okay, so you can have recurrent, involuntary, and intrusive distressing memories of that traumatic event. Recurrent distressing dreams, okay? Or the content is about the actual event. Recurrent dreams about a car accident. Recurrent dreams about a tsunami, okay? Or your affect, meaning your emotional state in your dream. You know how you wake up and you're like, I feel something from that dream? That matches the fear you felt in the trauma, okay? I'll share with you that, and Shauna knows this, my daughter was almost killed last year in a car accident. It was a very difficult time. I didn't witness it. I had PTSD as a mom who got the phone call, but she has PTSD because she was in the car, okay? And she was knocked out immediately. The car flipped 3 times. She was a passenger in the front seat of a kid who needed to practice patience in getting to the corner. And it was a terrible mistake, and he's lucky everyone survived. My daughter had the most severe injuries because she was in the front seat, passenger belted, and he jumped the median because he had to overcorrect. And they got broadsided right where she was sitting. So the car flipped 3 times. She was knocked out. She had collapsed lung, 6 pelvic fractures. She was in a wheelchair for 3 months, okay? Missed the last quarter of school, and had to learn to walk again. She has PTSD, okay? She kept saying, why do I dream about this every night? Because you have PTSD. And thank God she doesn't have a head injury. We tested for that. So we'll fix anything. I was telling her, below the neck, you can fix it. We'll get it there. Up above, we're trying to avoid all trauma. But she has that. She had recurrent dreams about seeing a car come at her. That's the last memory she had before she got knocked out. So that's recurrent, and it happened for the better part of 6 to 8 months. Okay, it's better now. Okay, she had flashbacks. She did not have a sense of derealization or depersonalization, and that's when you are really disconnected from yourself. She would say things like, I don't feel right, I don't feel like myself, but it wasn't that severe, like you could talk her through it, but it was bordering on that kind of derealization. Intense and prolonged psychological distress at cues. We were really concerned she was never going to be able to get in a car again. But she's driving now. Now I have trauma. Every day she gets in the car. Now my PTSD kicks in. Mark's physiological reaction, she would say her chest hurt. It was pounding at night. She couldn't go to sleep. PTSD. Okay, so persistent avoidance of stimuli associated with the trauma. We can't drive by 301 in Boyette anymore, which is fine. We weren't really driving by there anyway, but we can't anymore at all. We have to go around the blocks, and we avoid it still, okay? I did drive her through it one time because I'm a psychiatrist. I'm going to push her right through PTSD, but she was on her phone. She never even noticed. So what's a mom psychiatrist to do? I turned around. I did it again. I think we went back and forth to that intersection, and she finally looked up. She said, can we go home now? So she kind of got through it. Good for her. Okay. All right. So you can have negative alterations in thoughts and mood associated with the event. Sometimes you have dissociative amnesia due to the emotional trauma. Did we hear anything on the news recently where a woman said, this horrible trauma happened to me? I don't remember all the details. You're a liar. It's in the DSM. Before. Okay, she came forward. What I'm saying is, I don't think the woman read the DSM. Well, wait a minute, she's a psychologist. I think she read the DSM. I hope she read it. But I don't think she was taking her cues from that. Persistent, exaggerated negative beliefs. I'm bad. The world is dangerous. You can't get rid of those thoughts. It can change your brain chemistry. And you can end up with what's the disorder? Name a disorder you can end up with. I am bad. What does that lead to? Depression. What else? The world is not safe. Anxiety. Okay. They should take the boards for me. Okay. Persistent negative emotional state. Fear, horror, guilt, shame, anger. My daughter still cannot face the boy. Well, really, he can't face her is the issue. He's avoided, so which makes me think that he has PTSD. She believes him to be callous. I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist. I believe he's suffering. I really do. I think the kid is suffering, and he handled it by being very bravado, that people who got injured were making up the symptoms. But she can't make it up when you're in the trauma unit and in a wheelchair for 3 months. Feelings of detachment from others. There's this thing where it's hard to feel connected again, okay? Am I boring you guys? We nerded out a little bit, but we're good, right? All righty. Okay, so you can have alterations in your arousal state. That's automatic, and really it's autonomic, right? So it's automatic, but it's autonomic, okay? So you can have irritability and anger, recklessness, or being more self-destructive. Hypervigilance, okay? Exaggerated startle response. What is that? Who knows what an exaggerated startle response is? Right. So if you're a victim of physical assault or sexual assault and somebody comes up behind you, you're going to jump and, yeah, you know, that kind of thing. Or if you hear a loud bang, like my daughter does when we're in a car, or she sees a visual cue that there's a car accident, even if it's a fender bender, there have been tears. Okay? A few months ago, and she's driving her car, she was stopped. Well, I was in the car. It was a rainy day, and we were stopped at the stoplight, and I was giving her positive, which rarely happens. And I said, you know, honey, I'm really proud of you that you slowed down, and you didn't like a 17-year-old, I'm stopped. Okay, I'm very proud of you, right when we got hit from behind, because the person did not. So it was not a terrible accident, okay? None of us were physically injured. She was a puddle of a mess, okay? A puddle of a mess, because it brought it back. But I was very proud of how she handled it. How do you handle it to get yourself through trauma? Did she say food? I mean, that's how I've handled things, but I don't know about you. Okay, she talked about it immediately. Before the police got there to write up their report, there was a parade of teenagers, such that the police officer said, who was involved in this accident? Who was involved? Okay, she reached out to everybody, but I don't know what she was doing while I was saying to the lady behind us, are you okay? She apparently was on social media saying, come get me, help me, come. She reached out and she brought in a support system, okay? She got through it, okay? My husband was furious because that was $5,000, okay, of damage to the back of the car. Okay, I want to talk about spirituality and psychology. Are they mutually exclusive, or are they blended? What do you guys think? I think they're blended. I mean, you have to be. Have you ever been to a doctor and you feel like they're soulless? Like they're just like clinical? And if you say, I believe in God, they'll be like, okay, delusional, right? Oh, I've been to doctors like that, okay? And I strive not to be a doctor like that because it's not who I am. So, all right, so the psyche and logos, soul and study, okay? Psyche and pathos, the suffering of the soul. Psychology essentially means the study of the soul, right? Psycho and logos. I'm not sure if I'm saying it right, as long as I don't say Legos. Logos, okay? The psychologist or the therapist or the psychiatrist is an attendant to the soul, okay? Therapy connection is, in essence, delving into the soul and the psyche of the person, helping them to grow and process their experiences. We're not really here to sit in judgment of what your experiences are. And if that doctor is, you need to find another doctor. My number is 813. No, I'm kidding. Okay, vulnerability from trauma can have impacts on your spiritual connection. There can be positive and negative, right? Does God exist? How could God let this happen? Okay. I spoke with my grandparents when they came, not when they came over, about when they came over, not when they came over. I wasn't born yet. I promise you I was not born during the Holocaust, but I was born during JFK. Okay, so my grandfather lost 19 members of his family in the Holocaust. My grandmother lost several. I didn't pay attention. She didn't speak English very well. She spoke Polish. She was from Poland. And she spoke Yiddish, which is that common language in Eastern Europe among the Jews, that you can be from any country, and the common language is Hebrew, but what do you say? The language that you normally speak, right, is, what did you call it? Yeah, it was Yiddish. You know, let's not talk in front, it's always mixed with English. My dad used to say, let's not talk in front of the Kindler, and point to us, and we're like, okay, I think we know that Yiddish word. Okay. Okay, so, and they would talk about what that was like to grow up with constant fear, okay, from this trauma of the Holocaust. That's a powerful thing, okay, powerful. And many of the Jews then thought, how can we believe that God cares about us if 6 million have been murdered, okay, because of hatred, okay? So you can see that it can have that. But then you hear people who have gotten through that trauma and they speak beautifully about faith. And I'm interested in those people and how you keep your faith in times of trauma and devastation and hardship. I think maybe the pastor will probably hop up here and join me soon and talk about how you keep your faith during trauma. Okay. All right. So with trauma and spirituality, you need to access your inner resources to be effective in how you buffer the stress, okay? And how you heal from emotional turmoil, okay? So you need to have like a contemplative attitude, somebody who's willing to sit back and say, gosh, you know, this horrible thing happened, and I want to think about it. I want to think what the meaning of life is, okay, when in light of these horrible things. I'm searching for meaning. Traumatic events lead to changes in the worldview of the person and fundamental assumptions of the meaningfulness, the goodness, and safety in the world, and all of these can shift to a negative view, right? So it can lead to questions about the fundamental nature between the Creator and all of us, okay? Or pockets of us, right? The African American experience. Why was that ever okay? Right? The Jewish experience. Why was that ever okay? Or what's happening with genocide in other countries? It's not okay. Okay? And I can despair, but I choose to have faith and find a way to join with others. Resilience is what gets us through trauma, right? What makes us resilient? What are the traits that makes one resilient and one crumble? Okay? And there are psychological traits. I have a couple of, here's my nerdiness, here it comes. In preparing for this talk, because I just got in from Seattle yesterday and I was up until 2, I was nerding out and having a lovely time. And I have a couple of articles about spirituality and trauma. So I was really enjoying reading it. So trauma researchers have pointed out the importance of individual differences in resilience and how we get through trauma, the ability to go through difficulties and regain satisfactory quality of life. Vulnerability is determined to be key for the intensity and duration of what the trauma-related symptoms become. Some personality traits are protective and some are not. We can all agree on that. Makes sense. So what they found is for resilient traits, sense of competence, a sense of confidence, the willingness to reach out to others and create that strong support system. Having a sense of humor, I think that's probably one of my bigger traits. I really enjoy talking, joking. Oh, Yiddish word, kibitzing. I enjoy kibitzing, okay? I enjoy kibitzing, okay? Morality, doing what's right. Having faith that something bigger than me gives a darn about me and all of us, okay? Acceptance of what is. Let go, let God. You've all heard that saying, okay? And practicing patience, that things will get better. Hang in there. I'm not going to do the kitty cat. But anyways, okay. All right, hope and spirituality. With trauma, people often look for a new sense of meaning and purpose in their life. The opposite of this is they become hopeless. All right, spirituality and religiosity may be cornerstones in how we reframe our perception of what happened and how we behave or respond to the trauma. Spiritual religious beliefs, practices are important components in almost all cultures. We share that. All of us on this planet, we share that we want there to be hope. Okay? I'm not talking about all the fundamentalists that are running around creating havoc. I'm not sure what they're sharing. Okay, hatred. Religious frameworks can influence how we interpret trauma and how we recover from it. Okay? So there's resiliency in religions. In Christianity, and you guys can teach me a lot more than I can teach you about it, there are many stories of resiliency in the Bible. The story of Job, of course, is the most, I think, common one that people talk about. And he retained his faith despite suffering and hardship. Retained it. I felt like reading that thing and felt like throwing in the towel and saying, this is baloney, I'm out. Okay, all right? But that's what it is. And the gospel verifies for those with faith a freedom that releases one to be with to be who they are, meant to be despite the circumstances. Okay, faith does that. I'm not sitting here trying to sound like I'm a rabbi or a priest or a preacher, but I'm just enjoying this, okay? All right. Okay, in Judaism, in the Hebrew Bible, the Torah, which are the 5 books of Moses, who can name them? Did you get all 5? I see 4 fingers. 5, good for you, yes, somebody give her a Tanakh, which is the Hebrew Bible. Okay, okay. There are stories about human suffering along with the persistent ability to overcome, right? You know the joke that well, maybe you don't know. Come to my house for Pesach, Passover, and you'll know the joke. They tried to kill us. We overcame. Let's eat. Right? That's the joke about every big Seder. Have you been to a Seder? Oh, man, it's a good time, and it lasts forever. By the time you actually get to the matzo ball soup, the Jews have left Egypt. They're en route, and you're starving. So can I just have the matzo ball soup? Okay. All right. And what it does is the whole Seder teaches you about overcoming hardship, okay, through prayer, through story, through symbolism, through family connections. We're sitting around the table with our family. My mother used to say when we'd come home from college, all my chickens are here. Okay? My chickens are home for Passover, and that was really important. Just as important as it was to get out of Egypt already so we can eat matzo ball soup. No, okay, biblical law teaches people not to dwell on the past, but to learn from it, learn from the suffering, create partnership with God to remove aspects of suffering on earth. We work for each other. Okay. In Islam, the Quran is full of guidance and resiliency and forgiveness. Muslims believe in fatalism and that everything that happens comes from God. Is that so different that we see? I have always thought about religion as a prism, the crystal, and we're all standing around it, and depending on where the light comes in and the color that comes to us is how we see the same faith. That's kind of my view of it. Muslims have the daily prayers that offer a time to strengthen the relationship with God, and Ramadan and, I'm not going to pronounce it correctly, Hajj, okay, are times for peace and coming together. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Okay. Spiritual resources to trauma. So when a horrible thing happens, and we've had so many lately, what do people do? Pray, come together. They have vigils, prayer services, healing rituals, okay, memorials. I wrote these last 2 things down. I didn't find them actually in a study, but I felt like this is how I view it. Support among the faiths and coming together in times of trauma. Okay? Supporting cohesion rather than division. Okay? Supporting love instead of fear. Okay? So, when there was that horrific event in the Muslim community, our synagogue and the synagogues in Tampa rallied, and we raised money. Okay? And I know that the Christian faiths did as well. When there was a shooting recently, 1 week ago today, at the synagogue in Pittsburgh that took 11 innocent lives. Just as something that is nice to see in the news is the Muslim faiths that came together and raised, I think it was $900,000 in a week to pay for the funerals of these innocent victims. Now, when you think about it, we come together more than we don't. But divisive language separates us. Okay, so we have to find a way to come together. Okay, charity, that's another way that people give, and that kind of got me thinking about it. In Christianity, there's this concept of agape. Am I saying it correctly? Okay, all right. It comes from the word love, which is beautiful, okay? Shown in the life, teachings, and death of Jesus Christ. St. Augustine said, charity is a virtue which, when our affections are perfectly ordered, unites us to God, for by it we love Him. By giving out to others, we show our love to God. In Judaism, we have the concept of tikkun olam. Have you heard of that? It literally means repairing the world, and it is our obligation. Okay, and we do it by doing mitzvot. Have you heard of that? A bar mitzvah. Okay, right? A bat mitzvah. I was a bat mitzvah 2 years ago. Did you come to my bat mitzvah? I think you said, I'm busy that day. Okay. I got bat mitzvahed at the tender age of 53. I was the oldest one in my class. So usually are 13-year-olds. But I did a 2-year study of Hebrew and the Torah, and more than memorizing my Hebrew portion, the Torah portion that I had to read in front of everyone, I really wanted to understand it. And it was a very powerful experience. So we repair the world by doing mitzvot, which are good deeds that God expects of us to give to each other. We give to each other by a type of charity called tzedakah, not to be confused with Neil Sedaka. See, thank you. Thank you. At least Neil Sedaka was a very nice man singer in the 70s. My husband loves Neil Sedaka. So he was a little corny, I thought. But tzedakah, okay? And in Jewish homes, there's a little tzedakah box, okay, that we put change in. And we're not supposed to take any out no matter how much the ice cream truck comes down the street and you're like, I need some money. Or don't take it out. We give it to charity. Islam has a similar concept called zakat. Giving to less fortunate, bringing hearts together, helping each other. It is their religious obligation to help others. It's all of ours. So why are we fighting? Okay. Oh, I just did a sign. This is the sign of a certain person in office. That is the American Sign Language sign of the president. So I'm sorry, I think it was subconscious. I'm not going to say. All right, okay. And I wanted to leave you all, before we open it up for questions and chats and all this other kind of stuff, with the cover of the Pittsburgh Gazette. Did you guys, if you can put that up? This was the front page of the Pittsburgh Gazette, okay? These are the first 4 words of the prayer for the dead in Hebrew. Yitgadah v'yitgadah Shema Rabbah. First 4 words, magnified and sanctified be your name. They put it on the cover because we are one. Okay, we are one. I just want to thank you all for having me speak. Thanks. Anybody have questions? Yes, ma'am.
That's okay, I'll go.
Okay.
All right, so you have been talking about trauma, and, you know, we are experiencing trauma in this community. And so I'm thinking, how can we as a church then, you know, surround and support and make ourselves visible to, you know, what do we do in order to help, you know, show that we are sensitive to the trauma that is happening? I mean, something just happened at like Obed School, you know, that event that happened. I'm just wondering, you know, how can we take more active part to deal with the trauma and like show our support to the community? We're not very, you know, knowledgeable about how to deal with trauma issues, but we are sensitive and we want to make sure that we're showing the love. So, you know, how can we do that in a realistic way?
I got to tell you, I walked into the church when I first got here. I think I was one of the first ones here. And I looked at the posters that were up, and I had an overwhelming warmth of what you're already doing for the community. I thought it was just beautiful. Just beautiful, the different groups, the different ways, yeah, and right out here. I think that's how we reach out to each other. At our synagogue, we had an amazing rabbi who left our synagogue last year, and she's doing something with the National Central Congregation of Reformed Judaism, something. It's way on up there. Anyway, all right, so she kind of helps out other rabbis, and she was amazing. And when this trauma happened at the mosque, She was one of the first ones who organized with other synagogues that we go there, we do something, we help clean, we do whatever. That's how we show our support for one another, right? We weren't the only faith group there. There were Christian groups, okay? There were wonderful connections. And from that, she started talks at our synagogue that were interfaith. And we have interfaith couples at our church, at our synagogue. And we learn from one another. And we have people who have converted to Judaism. We have people who have left Judaism. We're all one, right? And that's where I think is our cohesion. We give back to the community, and we talk to each other, right? I mean, people who don't talk to each other, they end up with the fear, and that's what I think has been the rhetoric, is separate, divide, okay? And I always say, and I just found this on social media as well, that what happened with the Holocaust didn't start with the Holocaust. It started hate talk, okay, and division and fear, and worry about that group because they might be up to something, okay? All right, worry about that group. Okay, so that's, you know, we got to talk to each other. Other folks? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. He stole it from me before, so I'm here. To answer your previous question, and as you are talking about the talk and what can we do as a church and as a community, we have to move away from that stigmatizing thought and language of when people have stressors, abuse, trauma, homosexuality, or substance abuse, that those are those people and that those issues don't affect us. So having a group in the church, and I wanted to mention this, I've been talking to people about it, and Pastor might be at your board meeting tomorrow, where we'll start a group where those type of topics are welcomed and people are made to know they're not alone, and others who have been through it, how they got through it. And that, I think, will be the first step toward getting people the support they need, the help they need, because far too often people come to a place of worship and they leave without their burdens being unloaded, without any needs being met. So being able to show that love, that support, that partnership with people and letting them know it's okay. You can get through it. This is how, that's going to be huge. The culture has to change, a culture of acceptance of things we've seen as so taboo and that we shouldn't be experiencing because we're religious or Christian. That's where we start, how we think about it. So I'm so glad you all are here today because it just goes in line and with what we need to do as a church.
Yeah, and I think it's what we need to do as humanity, is come together, right? All right, and support one another. I'm glad we're not all the same. Oh my God, if I had to look at everybody that was just in my family, it would be boring, right? It's just boring. We have to celebrate diversity, okay? I don't have a Christian background, but boy, what can I learn from you guys that will enrich my life, right? Right? And you guys may or may not have a Jewish background, okay? What can you come to Friday night services and learn about the service that happens there, right? Yeah, you know? And it's just, it's in going to a mosque, you know, and seeing the service there. We don't have to agree with every single aspect that someone sees through the prism, okay, above us, but we're all one. And that's my view, you know. But anyway, anybody else? Other questions, other thoughts, emotional feelings? I hope it's a little bit uplifting. Okay.
Okay, so coming from a Caribbean background, this is also going to what you were talking about a little bit. When it's time to address mental issues, I being Haitian, growing up, there was no such thing as mental issues. It's just you're bad, you're gonna get a whooping, that should cure you. So when it is, when it's like the child is growing up and there's a lot going on, especially in the household, the Haitian parents or the Caribbean parent don't really know how to deal with that particular issue. And a lot of times they'll say it's satanic. Mm-hmm. You're obsessed. Right. Obsessed?
Yeah.
Obsessed, yeah. Possessed, I'm sorry.
You're obsessed with being possessed,
yeah,
gotcha.
Got
it.
You're possessed, you know?
Right.
And it's like, automatically they think, oh, let me call the pastor, let me call this person to pray over my child,
Right.
when in actuality something is wrong.
Right, and that's, there's some education. That's like science and faith are not mutually exclusive. I mean, I believe the good Lord put scientists here so that we can, help one another, okay? I like to think of myself as a scientist of mental health and medicine, and what can I share? Does it mean that everything I say is gospel? No, I invite people to challenge that and just say, well, I think maybe some parenting differences could have helped that situation. And it's not all about finding the right medicine to fix that neurochemistry, and that's actually how I believe it's not all about that. And you can stand, come. I just wanted to say that when we're teaching medical students about how you approach a patient, we teach them about the biopsychosocial model. Have you heard of that? Biopsychosocial. It's beautiful, right? So we kind of lump in the social, family and faith and stuff. It really should be the biopsychosocial, religious, cultural model. It really should, because you really want to get a sense of what is that person's experience. They're not me, so it must be different than me, so I need to know what it is so that I can be of service to them. So, yes, ma'am.
I was going to partly answer that in the fact that there are going to be some parents or some generations that are not going to break that mold. And so in moving forward, and I saw a quote a long time ago that still resonates with me, be who you needed when you were younger.
Oh, that's beautiful.
So we have to be who you needed when you were younger. So then we have to be there for that person. So
Right.
Especially, being in a church or a synagogue or a mosque, whatever, we become a family of our own.
Mm-hmm.
If you know that parenting style is not healthy, it only takes one person. It takes one person to shift the life of a person, of another person. And so being there for that child that you see is having a lot of issues and they can't talk to their parents, if their parents trust you, build a relationship with that child. Be there. Be there to listen to what's going on. Of course, you don't have to encourage disobedience or whatever, but provide a support system for that child. And then there are some things that are out of our control. I too came from a Caribbean background.
Mm-hmm.
You just didn't talk about mental health. It's just, it just wasn't the thing. Just pray about it. You'll be fine. So
Right.
that religious, cultural issue, that I think a lot of people now struggle with mental health and even getting help, because it's like, well, that means I don't have faith. Be that person to say it's okay, or
Right.
I'm here for you. You can't talk to your parents, talk to somebody.
Right.
So I think we have to start to break the cycle,
Mm-hmm.
because we don't want them to then become adults who do the same thing.
Right. And I think that it's also partly the education piece. What we do know about beating children, right? I mean, in all of us, in my culture, you got a patch on the tuchus. Okay. If you did wrong, okay? All right. So, and still some young parents will kind of do that tongue-in-cheek. He's going to get a patch on his tuchus. He doesn't stop that, okay? But in other cultures, it's a different view on how you discipline your child and bring them up. And how many of us have said, look, I've gotten spankings and I'm doing okay, right? I'm a doctor, right? And I got my fair share of patches on the tuchus, okay? So, we have to be careful when we're talking with people of different backgrounds and cultures that we're not patronizing, right? Like, why would you do that? I mean, sometimes it comes across condescending, and so is that going to affect any change other than they're going and leaving and they ain't coming back to see you? Okay? You have to have respect for who they are, where they come from, what their heritage is, and what it was like. I mean, you don't believe it. I'm a generation, several generations away from the Holocaust. Do you think it affects me? Yeah, of course it affects me. But if I go into an office and I'm seeing somebody who's not from my background and they're just like, wow, Jews are neurotic, that's condescending. It's like, do you understand that I grew up with a grandfather who talked about brothers and sisters, aunts, uncles, and parents he's never seeing again. Okay? That affects a kid growing up. okay? So we have to have respect and understanding of the background, or we're just ineffective and we're wasting time and we're creating division. Okay, that's just my opinion on that one. Anybody else? Okay, now can we do Hava Nagila? I'm just kidding. I don't know all the words. Yes, ma'am. Hi.
When it comes to mental health, I believe there is a need for cultural competency amongst all cultures, because living in America, there is a lot of different ethnic groups in America, and there's not a lot of research being done on the stigma on mental health in across cultural groups. Like, that's one of my research for this year. But I noticed that most of the articles that are coming up doesn't have to do, I mean, it's not about African Americans, it's not about Hispanics, it's not about people that's not American. And I believe that's where most of the issue lies as well, because most of the articles that are being published does not talk about other cultures and how the culture, beliefs, and values and morals stigmatize and stop people from seeking help. And the people that do seek help, they drop out prematurely because their family's not supportive. So I'm very
There's
strong.
some challenges with that for sure.
Yes, and I believe there's a need, a very great need to educate others, even if they don't like listen, but there's a need to talk about it, because if not, you're gonna have a lot of people who are, you know, committing suicide, who are going to drugs, who are looking other places. And I feel like the church as well needs to come together to incorporate different ways to, like, if we're a church, we're healing. Like, I believe it should be holistically, not only spiritually, but mentally. There needs to be a addition to what, as Christians, we believe, or as Muslims, or whatever the case may be. There needs to be an addition to what is already the foundation, because if not, I've read so many articles, I've done so many research, and what I'm seeing is devastating. So there's a need to push education, not when we are this old, but when they are young. No one wants to talk about it when they're young. Then when they get to our age and we older, it's just like,
I think you really hit on a great point, and I wanted to, I'm not sure you probably already know about it, at USF and most universities now have cultural diversity centers. So the USF Center for Cultural Diversity, what is that, they have a program every year on health equality, HEMI or something, health equality something in medicine or something like that. I'm not saying it correctly, but if I can find it, I'll send it on and you can forward it. But that's what they do. And I actually, I've spent the better part of my career treating deaf and hard of hearing kids. And I'm hard of hearing myself since childhood. So I'm not part of the deaf culture, although they have accepted me as being partially hearing. But there is a different culture, okay? Different culture, and they are also in a marginalized community, okay? I mean, half the times they go to see a doctor and they have, like the experience of my friend who was born deaf. She has a hearing 6-year-old at the time, now she's 12, but she had a hearing 6-year-old who had the flu. And so the doctor did not arrange for an interpreter for mother, okay, and made this sick 6-year-old hearing child interpret to mother what medication the doctor wanted to prescribe. You know, my friend is wonderful. She got on FaceTime with me and had a stroke during the appointment because the doctor stepped out for a minute. And she said, "You need to tell that doctor." And I did. Like, are you kidding me? There's no interpreter? How can you do that? I mean, this mother is responsible for taking care of this child. And this is a woman who has her master's degree and is a LMHC, who's a therapist, okay, in the deaf community. How dare you ask my hearing 6-year-old to tell me and to try to spell amoxicillin? I mean, as adults, we can't even spell that, and to try to go over the side effects, okay, with mom. All right, and so that's another thing. So I have a very strong feeling about culture and cultural identity and cultural respect and coming together, because cultures are beautiful. Okay, right? And how we respect that from one another. So that's, your point is well taken, and I'd point you out to the USF Diversity College of Behavioral Sciences. I think it's in there. They do it. I did reach out to them one time and I said, I love your lineup, and there's a lot about African American. There you go. So you already know. So maybe you can share that with the rest of everyone. But I asked them, why is there nothing about deaf and their culture? And they actually wanted to sit with me and talk with me and go over that, you know, and how they can incorporate that. But it's important. We have multiple cultures within our own society even. And I've taken up a lot of your time, and I really appreciate you having me here. So.
Well, you know, I appreciate you guys having us here to give a presentation, and you know, I'll be coming to church. So you know, I've been coming for a while. You know, me and my husband. You know, sporadically, because sometimes we also visit the other church that the pastor was residing over our wedding. So, but I'll be here, and if you guys have more questions, you know, I welcome them. Okay. Thank you.
And I definitely want to thank Drs. Flavella and Dr. Goldberg for their patience. Once again, part of the reason why I asked them to do this is because when I started doing my clinical pastoral education at Tampa General, I kind of saw how, you know, we deal with a lot of stuff and we don't talk about it. At the hospital at Tampa General, when somebody who comes in as a trauma alert, trauma activation, stroke alert, STEMI alert, I have to talk to them in the midst of their greatest trauma, a present trauma. It's not something that they had to talk about that happened years ago and I'm trying, no, they got a gunshot wound, they're about to die, and I have to be able to minister to them in that moment of their crisis. And I'm like, well, if it's happening in the physical, it's also happening in the mental. Because we also see them the day after, 2 days after, and 3 days after, but then after that, we don't know what happens to them. Hopefully they get help after they leave the hospital, but we don't know what happens. So I figured if people are dealing with this in a present moment, what about afterwards? If you grew up in the Caribbean, you've dealt with trauma your whole life. Everybody needs to go to counseling, real talk. Whether you grew up in the Caribbean or in a strict African-American home, you need counseling, you need help. That's not optional. Okay, like, I'm actually being serious. Find a counselor, find a therapist, find somebody. Because the truth of the matter is, we weren't raised in a culture to talk about our problems or our feelings. It was always, man up, deal with it, it'll go away. That's not true. Things don't go away. You may internalize it for a moment, but it will resurface at some point in your life, and you don't know why you're reacting the way you're reacting. Get help. The only person who can help you is you. You can pray all you want, even God can't help you unless you admit you have a problem. That sounds blasphemous as a Christian. But even God can't help you unless you know you need help. Seek help. This is just the beginning. We're going to definitely invite Dr. Flavella and Dr. Goldberg back, and anybody else who can help educate us. Because it's literally about us becoming a holistic culture. Amen? In fact, I think we do have a copy of that resource list somewhere. I know I have it on my phone because I took a picture of it somewhere. The Crisis Center of Tampa Bay. We will definitely have Kelsey make sure and have some of that available. Once again, there's a ton of resources out there. Go get it. Share with people. A gift is only a gift if you share it. Don't just hear what's happening here and see a friend struggling, see a brother or a sister struggling, and then be like, it's uncomfortable. Let's be honest. it's uncomfortable just dealing with physical health issues, much more mental health issues. Keep on praying, but keep on growing, keep on seeking help. It doesn't just stop. It doesn't just get fixed overnight. Trauma is hard. Trauma is more than what we think it is. I remember one time when I was in class that they were saying, trauma is any loss. I always thought that trauma was only death. It's not true. One of my biggest traumas was coming to America. Biggest trauma ever. Culture change. Like when I got off the plane, America had a nasty smell. And I equated America with this dirty smell. Now, I flew into JFK, so it was New York City. But in my mind, all of America was nasty and filthy and dirty. And I still didn't process that stuff until like last year, real talk. America bruised me as a person. And I didn't understand I was holding on to stuff from when I was 10 years old. We have to learn to talk. Part of the problem is we don't listen. And sometimes we won't talk with our words, but we'll talk with our actions. And you'll see people lashing out and being rebellious. There's a reason why it's happening. Talk to somebody. We don't have all the answers today, but we will continue to find additional professionals to come and educate. Because guess what? With what happened at OVET school, part of how to help people in that kind of trauma is just being present, listening, knowing how to ask the right questions. Because sometimes people, you can say, how are you doing? And they're like, I'm doing good. And I'm like, no, how are you actually doing? Because your face doesn't show what you just said. There's a disconnect between your words and how you look. People will tell you their life story. Can you hold all that messiness? And I think that's part of the problem. We are just so judgmental, uncomfortable, because we're not used to hearing people's pains and people's hurts. At some point, you have your own hurts and pains. Don't just be sympathetic, be empathetic. I want to thank doctors. I want to thank you for coming here. Please, we're going to continue to have a lot more different series, so we pray that you will come on out, attend, tell a friend. If we're going to have to broadcast, if people can't make it, we will broadcast it. People, the world is hurting. We are hurting. You can empathize. Just be with them in their pain. And as Shabbat has come to a close and the new week has begun, we're Sabbath keepers. We're Sabbath keepers. Yeah, so our Sabbath is done, and now the new week has begun. So let's stand and bow our heads for a word of prayer as we get ready to leave from here. Yeah. So when you said Shabbat Shalom, I was like, oh yeah, that's us. Let's pray. God, we thank you for another opportunity just to come to you in prayer. Being able to get the information that has been poured out by Dr. Favela and Dr. Goldberg. But Father, there's so much more. We're just scratching the surface. Father, in some way, shape, or form, we all have some anxiety. We all deal with depression. We all deal with trauma. God, we're thankful that you are God of all. All information, all wisdom is yours. So continue to help us to realize that we don't know it all, that there's still more that we can learn, more that we can grow. Help us to realize that if we're struggling and we need help, maybe talk to somebody. We don't have to deal with our pains and our struggles by ourselves. We are here as a community to help each other. So teach us how to be there for one another. Teach us how to hold each other's hurts and pains and not be judgmental. Teach us to realize that when people are struggling, we can help them through their struggles. And even when we can't, that we can find someone else to help them. May we be more perceptive to people's needs, perceptive to the hurts and the pains of us and also of the community. Help us to be the community church that you've called us to be. And as the sun has set, the Sabbath has ended, This new week has begun. We ask for a new week's blessing, that we will begin to heal from the hurt, heal from the pain, and continue to keep those that are presently going through their struggles, their hurts, their bereavement. May we continue to keep them in our prayers. Dismiss us now with your blessing. In your name, amen. Have a blessed week, everyone.
Time change, don't forget.
Please roll your clocks back, because you will be late or early for your appointments. Yeah.